I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. When I stepped into that courtroom, my nephew Peter smirked at his fiancée Helen, whispering something that made her nod with satisfaction. But then something unexpected happened. Judge Isabella Ramos lifted her gaze from the documents before her, and her eyes locked on mine. Her expression froze, as if the past had walked right into the room. "It's her," she whispered, barely audible. The entire courtroom went silent. Lawyers paused mid-sentence. The clerk stopped typing. Even the bailiff shifted nervously. Peter's confident smile wavered, and Helen frowned with confusion. They had no idea what those two words meant, but I did. I had lived long enough to recognize when fate was about to turn. They thought I was just an aging bookstore owner clinging to a failing business. They believed they had stripped me of every ounce of dignity. What they never realized was that I carried a story much older, much stronger than their greed. Every morning on Marrow Street began the same way for me. I rose at 5:30 a.m., filled my old French press with water, and reached for the ceramic mug that had survived more than 15 years of early mornings. The smell of fresh ground coffee filled the small cafe corner, while I checked on the spider plant by the front window. My late mentor, Dr. Roslyn Hartwell, had given me that plant when I first opened the bookstore, and tending to it kept her wisdom close to me even after she was gone. My life wasn't extraordinary. It was a rhythm of small habits, each one stitched with memory and meaning. I had never built an empire or made headlines, but I had poured every ounce of myself into serving my community. I worked late nights as a community nurse, volunteered at literacy programs, and quietly helped neighbors navigate medical crises, all while building a modest bookstore that became a refuge for people who needed one. To most people, I was just a quiet woman with graying hair and hands that showed years of service. But in my heart, I carried decades of quiet guardianship that no one could see. That Tuesday morning was meant to be ordinary. I had spent the early hours arranging a new display of local authors, the kind of work that made my fingers ache but filled me with purpose. It was the good kind of ache, the kind that comes from creating something meaningful. I had unlocked the sidewalk chalkboard and written, "Bring back your voice," in careful script, placed fresh water in the spider plant's saucer, and set out the handwritten receipt book for Mrs. Amber, who would stop by for her weekly mystery novel. I wanted the shop to feel like what it had always been, a place of welcome, safety, and belonging. When they arrived, Peter walked straight to the cafe counter, picked up my personal mug without asking, and set his briefcase down as if the shop belonged to him. He was a man in his early 30s with carefully styled hair, wearing a designer watch that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. Helen stood beside him in a tailored blazer, her expression pleasant, but her eyes calculating. "Aunt Grace, we need to talk," Peter said, in a tone that was friendly on the surface but carried an edge underneath. I noticed Helen glancing around the shop, her gaze lingering on the deed folder I kept near the register. Her phone was already in her hand. "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything okay?" I motioned toward the cafe table. "I just brewed a fresh pot. Let me get you both a cup." "This isn't a social call," Peter interrupted, his voice cutting through my words. "We have important matters to discuss." Helen didn't even flinch at his abruptness. Instead, she nodded as if he'd said something reasonable. "Aunt Grace," Peter continued, pulling out a clipboard, "we've been worried. The shop is too much for you to manage alone. You're not getting any younger, and we think it's time to consider your options." My hands stilled on the coffee pot. "What are you saying, Peter?" Helen leaned forward with practiced sympathy. "We found a wonderful assisted living community, Riverside Gardens. They have book clubs, activities, even a small library. You'd love it there. But this is my home, I said, my voice catching. My work. Dr. Hartwell entrusted this place to me. Every shelf carries a story. Peter's face remained unmoved. Memories are important, Aunt Grace, but so is your safety. We've already started the paperwork, he added, sliding documents across the table. Temporary guardianship, just to help you transition. It's for your own good. Guardianship. The word hung in the air between us, sharp and invasive. I'm not signing anything, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Peter's pleasant expression disappeared. Aunt Grace, be reasonable. You stumbled on the back step last week. What if something happens when no one's around? I wanted to remind him that I'd only caught my heel on the uneven wood and steadied myself immediately. But I knew it wouldn't matter. They'd already decided my fate without me. Let me think about it, I said instead, rising from my chair. This is a lot to process. Peter exchanged a look with Helen that made my stomach drop. I'd seen that look before. The silent communication between people who think they're smarter than you. As I turned toward the register, I noticed Helen photographing the shop layout on her phone. She didn't even try to hide it. A few days later, Peter arrived without warning, bringing Helen and a leather portfolio. They settled at the cafe table as if they owned the place. Helen pulled out a folder and slid it across to me. Aunt Grace, we've consulted with a specialist, Peter said, his tone more aggressive now. There are concerns about your cognitive health. He produced a doctor's letter claiming I showed signs of early cognitive decline and recommending supervised care. I stared at the letterhead, a clinic I'd never visited, a doctor I'd never met. This is a mistake, I said, my voice shaking. I've never seen this doctor. The evaluation was thorough, Helen said smoothly. We're just trying to help you before things get worse. Each word felt like a hammer striking the foundation of my life. My bookstore was no longer sacred to them. It was only property, square footage, and profit potential. Mrs. Amber appeared at the door, holding a container of homemade cookies. She took one look at the scene and frowned. Grace, is everything all right? She asked, her eyes tracking the documents spread across the table. Before I could answer, Peter stood and stepped between us. Family business, Mom. Grace is transitioning to assisted living. We're just helping her with the arrangements. Mrs. Amber's eyes widened, and she looked to me for confirmation. The shame of it, having my neighbors learn about these plans before I'd even agreed to them, burned my cheeks. Nothing's decided yet, I managed to say. Actually, it is, Peter replied coldly. Aunt Grace just hasn't accepted it yet. Mrs. Amber set the cookies down and squeezed my hand. Call me later, she whispered before leaving. After they left, I sat alone in the shop, surrounded by the evidence of people who had invaded my space. Peter's briefcase still on the counter. The guardianship papers left like a threat, Helen's perfume lingering in the air. Even the atmosphere felt different, heavy with coercion and entitlement. I picked up the phone to call Mrs. Amber, but as I reached for it, I saw Peter had left his business card on the table, embossed, expensive, with a new title. Real Estate Development Consultant. He'd never mentioned changing careers. I placed the card in my apron pocket and walked slowly to the back office, my legs suddenly feeling every one of my 68 years. The shop was quiet now, almost too quiet. The afternoon sun slanted through the front windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny witnesses to what had just happened. I sat at the old oak desk that Dr. Rosalind Hartwell had left me, the one with the brass handles that had tarnished over the years. Her photograph sat in a simple frame on the corner, her kind eyes and knowing smile captured at the trust's founding ceremony 20 years ago. I hadn't been there that day. She'd told me it was better that way, that some protections work best in shadow. Real power protects, Grace, she used to say during our late-night conversations over tea. It doesn't parade. I pulled Peter's business card from my pocket and studied it. Real estate development consultant. The timing was too convenient, the pressure too calculated. And that doctor's letter, fabricated, I was certain, felt like something more than simple greed. It felt organized, professional. My hands trembled as I opened the desk's bottom drawer, the one that always stuck a little. Inside were the usual things: old tax returns, insurance papers, a stack of Dr. Hartwell's handwritten notes about community health initiatives. But tonight, I needed something else. Something I'd signed years ago without fully understanding its weight. I pushed aside the folders, my fingers searching the back of the drawer. And then I felt it. The slight unevenness. The seam that didn't quite match. The false bottom Dr. Hartwell had installed herself, insisting I'd know when the time came to look. "When the wolves circle," she'd said, pressing my hand, "you'll remember this drawer." The wolves were circling now. I pressed the hidden latch, and the false bottom released with a soft click. Inside lay a sealed binder with Marrow Street Trust, confidential, embossed on the cover, and beneath it, a stack of letters bound with string. The top envelope bore my name in Dr. Hartwell's elegant script. To Grace. When the wolves circle. My heart hammered as I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Her words, written years ago, felt like she was speaking directly to me across time. My dear Grace, if you're reading this, then someone has come for what you've built. They always do. Greed has a way of sniffing out vulnerability, real or perceived. You are not vulnerable. You never were. 20 years ago, I established the Marrow Street Community Land Trust to protect our neighbours from the predators who see people as profit margins. I chose you as my successor, not because you sought power, but because you understand its true purpose. You are not just a bookstore owner, Grace. You are the chair of a trust that owns or controls half this block. The building where your shop sits, the residential lofts across the street, the community garden, the small medical clinic. All of it protected under bylaws designed to shield the vulnerable from displacement. I kept this quiet because silence is its own fortress. The developers who wanted this land never knew who truly held the keys. By the time they realized, it was too late. You signed the papers years ago, thinking you were simply co-signing for a community fund. You were doing so much more. You were accepting a guardianship, not of property, but of people, of legacy, of home. The bylaws are clear. As chair, you have final authority to enforce lease terms, to defend the mission, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Use this power wisely, Grace. Use it as you've used everything else in your life, in service, not in spectacle. The wolves are at your door. Show them what a shepherd can do. With love and faith, Roslyn. I read the letter 3 times, my hands steadying with each pass. Then I opened the binder. Inside were property deeds, lease agreements, trust bylaws, and financial statements, page after page of careful documentation. And there, on the 3rd page of the residential lease section, I found it. Peter Castellano, Unit 4B, Marrow Street Lofts, leaseholder. My nephew was my tenant. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so bitter. He'd been living on land I controlled, paying rent that cycled back into the trust I chaired, all while plotting to take my home and business. I sat back in the chair, Dr. Hartwell's letter still in my hand, and for the first time in days, I felt the ground steady beneath my feet. They thought they were hunting me. They had no idea they were standing on land I controlled. I reached for the phone and dialed the number listed in the binder under legal counsel. A man answered on the second ring. Mark Thornton. Mr. Thornton, I said, my voice calm now, certain. My name is Grace. Dr. Rosalind Hartwell told me to call you when the time was right. There was a pause, and then his voice softened with recognition. She always said you would. I've been waiting. Then I think, I said, glancing at Peter's business card one more time before setting it aside, it's time we talked about wolves. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay in the small apartment above the bookstore, staring at the ceiling while my mind replayed Helen's camera flash, Peter's entitled tone, that fraudulent doctor's letter. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the guardianship papers spread across my cafe table like a trap waiting to spring. At 3 a.m., I gave up. I wrapped myself in Dr. Hartwell's old cardigan, the one she'd left hanging on my office chair the last day she visited, and went downstairs. The shop was dark, except for the streetlight glow filtering through the front windows. I made my way to the back office and switched on the small desk lamp. The binder lay where I'd left it, and beside it, the stack of letters Dr. Hartwell had written. I picked up the second envelope. It was thicker than the first, and when I opened it, several newspaper clippings fell out, along with another handwritten letter. Grace, by now you've read the first letter, and you know what you are. The chair of the Marrow Street Trust. But knowing your title and understanding your power are different things. I'm enclosing evidence of what we built together, though you didn't know it at the time. The clippings document the Apex development scandal from 15 years ago. You'll remember it. You were the one who saw the bribes, the forged permits, the elderly residents being pushed out of rent-controlled apartments. You were the one who sent me the evidence. You were Marrow Sparrow, though you never called yourself that. The prosecutors did, after the anonymous brown envelopes kept arriving with perfect documentation. You brought down a corruption ring that had poisoned this city for a decade. I never told you that the lead prosecutor was a young ADA named Isabella Ramos. She's a judge now. And she never forgot the source who trusted her with the truth. Some debts, Grace, are never forgotten. Some seeds take years to bear fruit. Keep reading. Keep learning. The trust is your shield, but knowledge is your sword. Ah. My hands shook as I unfolded the clippings. There it was, the Apex development scandal splashed across the front page of the Riverton Chronicle. CEO arrested, city councilman indicted, dozens of fraudulent evictions overturned. I remembered it all. I'd been working as a community nurse back then, visiting elderly patients in their homes. I'd seen the notices taped to doors, the building inspectors, who were really hired intimidators, the overnight rent increases designed to force people out. I'd collected every document I could find, notices, contracts, photographs, and mailed them to the DA's office in unmarked envelopes. I never knew what happened to them. I never followed up. I just kept working, kept helping my patients, kept my head down. But Dr. Queen Hartwell had known. She'd known everything. I was still holding the clippings when my phone rang, startling me. The caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize. Hello? Ms. Grace, this is Mark Thornton. I hope I'm not calling too early. I glanced at the clock. 5:45 a.m. You're not. I've been up for hours. I thought you might be, he said gently. I'd like to come by this morning if that's all right. We have a lot to discuss, And time is not on our side if your nephew is moving as aggressively as you described. Yes, I said. Please come. I'll have coffee ready. I'll be there at 7. Mark Thornton arrived exactly on time. He was a man in his mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the calm, methodical presence of someone who'd spent decades navigating complex legal waters. He carried a leather messenger bag and wore a simple grey suit that had seen years of professional use. "Ms. Grace," he said, extending his hand. "It's an honor to finally meet you. Dr. Hartwell spoke of you often." "Please, just Grace," I said, shaking his hand. "Come in. Sit." We settled at the cafe table, the same one where Peter and Helen had ambushed me days before. But this time the atmosphere was different. This time I wasn't alone. Mark opened his messenger bag and pulled out a laptop. Dr. Hartwell briefed me thoroughly before she passed. "I've been the Trust's legal counsel for 12 years, and I've kept everything current. Filings, tax records, lease agreements. The Trust is in excellent standing." He turned the laptop toward me, and I saw a spreadsheet with property addresses, lease terms, and tenant names. "The Marrow Street Community Land Trust owns the land beneath 7 properties on this block," Mark explained, his finger tracing down the list. "Your bookstore building, the community garden, the old medical clinic, and 4 residential lofts, including—" "Unit 4B, I said quietly. "Peter's loft." Mark nodded. "Exactly. Your nephew has been a tenant for 3 years. His lease includes standard bylaws, no harassment of neighbours, no fraudulent claims against trust property, no attempts to displace vulnerable tenants. And if he violates those terms? Immediate lease termination. 30 days to vacate, no exceptions." I sat back, letting the weight of it settle over me. "So, when he tried to force me into signing guardianship papers—" "He violated his lease," Mark finished, "and when he presented that fraudulent medical letter, he committed lease fraud. We have grounds to issue a formal notice right now." "But that's not enough, is it?" I asked. "He'll just fight it, hire lawyers, drag it out." Mark's expression grew serious. "You're right. Which is why we need to gather more evidence first. Document every interaction, every threat, every fraudulent claim. Build a case so airtight that when we move, he has no room to maneuver." He pulled out a folder and slid it across to me. "I did some preliminary research after your call last night. Your nephew's new business, real estate development consultant, it's registered under a parent company called Apex Ventures Group." My blood went cold. Apex. Different entity from the original Apex development that went down 15 years ago, but there are connections, some of the same investors. Similar tactics. Mark's eyes met mine. "Grace, I don't think your nephew is acting alone. I think he's part of something bigger." The pieces began clicking into place, the sudden pressure, the professional forgery, the coordinated approach. Peter wasn't just a greedy nephew. He was a front man. "What do we do?" I asked. Mark closed his laptop. "We do what Dr. Hartwell trained you to do. We watch, we document, we wait for them to make a mistake. And when they do, we strike with everything we have." He stood and handed me a small device, a digital recorder, slim and discreet. "Keep this with you. Record every conversation with Peter and Helen. Every threat, every claim, every word. It's legal in this state as long as you're party to the conversation." I took the recorder, feeling its weight in my palm. "One more thing," Mark said. Reaching into his bag, he pulled out a thick document and set it on the table. "This is a copy of the trust bylaws and your authority as chair. Read it tonight. Understand what power you hold. Because, Grace, you're not just defending yourself anymore. I'm defending the mission, I said, echoing Dr. Hartwell's letter. Exactly. Mark smiled for the first time. Dr. Hartwell chose well. I'll be in touch tomorrow. Call me immediately if Peter contacts you again. After he left, I stood at the shop window, watching the morning foot traffic on Marrow Street. Across the street, the lights were on in Unit 4B. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains, Peter and Helen, probably planning their next move. But now I was planning too. I looked down at the recorder in my hand, then slipped it into my apron pocket. For the first time in days, I felt the ground steady beneath my feet. They thought they were hunting me. They had no idea they were standing on land I controlled. 3 days passed in tense quiet. I opened the shop each morning, went through my routines, and waited. The digital recorder stayed in my apron pocket, a small weight that reminded me I wasn't defenseless anymore. Mrs. Amber stopped by on Wednesday with a thermos of soup. "You look tired, Grace," she said, studying my face with the concern of someone who'd known me for 15 years. "Are you sleeping?" "Not much," I admitted. "But I'm managing." She squeezed my hand. "If you need anything at all, you call me, day or night." I promised I would, though I knew I couldn't tell her everything. Not yet. Some battles had to be fought quietly. On Thursday afternoon, the bell above the shop door chimed. I looked up from the register and my stomach tightened. Peter walked in alone, carrying a manila folder. His expression was harder than before, the pretense of concern stripped away. "Aunt Grace," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "We need to talk." I slipped my hand into my apron pocket and pressed the record button. "About what, Peter?" He dropped the folder on the counter between us. "About your health. Helen and I have been doing our due diligence, and frankly, we're alarmed." "Alarmed about what?" "Your cognitive decline." He opened the folder and pulled out the same doctor's letter from before, along with several new documents. "We've consulted with a specialist, Dr. Raymond Chen at the Riverside Cognitive Center. He's reviewed your case and agrees that you're showing clear signs of early dementia." My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. "I've never met Dr. Chen. I've never been to that clinic." "The evaluation was based on observational data," Peter said smoothly. "Documented incidents, your fall on the back step, the confusion with your accounts. Mrs. Patterson mentioned you forgot her name last month." That was a lie. Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Amber's sister-in-law, had never said any such thing. "This is fabricated," I said quietly. Peter's jaw tightened. "This is medical evidence, Aunt Grace. And if you won't accept help voluntarily, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal guardianship through the courts." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that you're a danger to yourself." He pulled out another document, a petition for emergency guardianship. "We've already filed the preliminary paperwork. The hearing is scheduled for next month." The room seemed to tilt. "You can't do this?" "We can. And we are." Peter leaned forward, his voice dropping. "This doesn't have to be ugly, Aunt Grace. Sign over the shop voluntarily. Move to Riverside Gardens, and we'll drop the guardianship petition. You'll be taken care of. No court battles, no public humiliation." "And if I refuse?" His smile was cold. "Then we'll see you in court. And trust me, you won't win. We have medical evidence, witness statements, and a very good attorney." He left the documents on the counter and walked out without another word. I stood there, trembling, until the bell's chime faded. Then I pulled out my phone and called Mark. He just threatened me with emergency guardianship, I said, my voice shaking. He has a court date scheduled. Did you record it? Every word. Good. Send me the file and bring me those documents. I'm going to make some calls. An hour later, I was in Mark's office, a modest space above a coffee shop 3 blocks from Marrow Street. He listened to the recording twice, his expression growing darker with each pass. "This is elder abuse," he said flatly. "Textbook financial exploitation with a guardianship scam overlay. Can they actually win? Not if we move first." Mark pulled up a database on his computer. "I'm checking Dr. Raymond Chen's credentials now." He typed rapidly, then stopped. "Grace, there is no Dr. Raymond Chen licensed in this state. The Riverside Cognitive Center exists, but it's a wellness spa, not a medical facility. This letter is completely fraudulent." Relief and rage flooded through me in equal measure. So what do? We trace the source. Mark picked up his phone and dialed. "I have a contact at the State Medical Board. If someone's forging physician credentials, that's a felony." While he talked, I noticed a stack of papers on his desk: property records, financial statements, and a name I recognized: Apex Ventures Group. When Mark hung up, I pointed to the documents. "What did you find?" His expression was grim. "Your nephew took out a bridge loan 6 weeks ago, $200,000 at 18% interest. The loan application lists your bookstore building as collateral." "But he doesn't own it." "Exactly, which means he committed loan fraud. And here's where it gets worse." Mark pulled out a bank statement. "The loan payments show he's been covering gambling debts and cryptocurrency losses. He's underwater, Grace. Badly. He needs your property to survive." "So this was never about my safety. It was always about money." Mark handed me another document, a lease agreement. And there's more. Helen's signature appears as a witness on the guardianship petition, time-stamped last Tuesday at 2 p.m. But according to her employer's HR records, she was in a mandatory training session in Capital City that entire day. She couldn't have witnessed anything. Another forgery? Another felony? Mark leaned back in his chair. "Grace, your nephew isn't just greedy. He's desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. What's our next move?" "We wait for him to make another one. He's already violated his lease with the threats and fraudulent claims. Now we have evidence of loan fraud and forged documents. We're building a criminal case, not just a civil one." "How long do we wait?" "Not long. Desperate people don't have patience." Mark's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his eyebrows rose. "And speaking of impatience, my contact at the medical board just confirmed they're opening an investigation into the forged medical letter. They're also flagging a company called Senior Placement Solutions." "What's that?" "A consulting firm that specializes in helping families transition elderly relatives into care facilities. They've been under investigation before for guardianship scams. And guess who's listed as one of their affiliate partners? Apex Ventures Group." Bingo! Mark stood and walked to his window, looking out over Marrow Street. "Grace, this is bigger than your nephew. He's part of a network that targets vulnerable seniors, fabricates medical evidence, and seizes property through fraudulent guardianships. You're not their first victim. But if we play this right, you'll be their last." I joined him at the window. From here, I could see my bookstore, the chalkboard on the sidewalk, the spider plant in the window. "What do we do now?" "Now," Mark said, "we set a trap." 2 days later, Peter returned, this time with Helen and a moving truck. I was ready. I'd spent the morning printing copies of the trust bylaws, the lease violation notices, and the evidence Mark had compiled. When the truck pulled up outside, I calmly walked to the front door and taped a single sheet of paper to the glass. Notice of lease violation, Marrow Street, Community Land Trust Tenant, Peter Castellano, Unit 4B violation, harassment, fraudulent claims, attempted coercion remedy, immediate cessation of contact or face lease termination. Peter saw it the moment he stepped out of the truck. His face went red. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, ripping the notice down. I opened the door, the recorder running in my pocket. "It's exactly what it says. You're in violation of your lease, Peter. The land beneath your loft is owned by the Marrow Street Trust. I chair that trust, and you've been harassing me." "This is insane." "The trust bylaws are clear," I continued, my voice steady. "Continued interference triggers immediate lease termination. You have 30 days to vacate Unit 4B. Helen's face went pale. "Peter? What is she talking about?" "She's bluffing," Peter snapped. But his eyes betrayed him. He knew I wasn't. Mark's car pulled up behind the moving truck. He stepped out, carrying a briefcase, and walked calmly to where we stood. "Mr. Castellano," Mark said, handing Peter a formal document. "I'm Mark Thornton, legal counsel for the Marrow Street Trust. You've just been served with a formal lease termination notice. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Any further contact with Ms. Grace will result in a restraining order and criminal harassment charges." Peter stared at the document, his hands shaking. "You can't do this." "We already have," Mark said. "The movers can leave now, or I'll call the police for trespassing." The movers, sensing trouble, were already climbing back into the truck. Helen grabbed Peter's arm. "Peter? He forged the power of attorney? I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "Shut up," Peter hissed. But it was too late. I had it all on tape. Mark's expression didn't change. "Ms. Helen, if you'd like to speak with me privately about your involvement, I'd be happy to arrange that. Cooperation tends to help in these situations." Peter's face twisted with rage. "This isn't over." "Actually," I said quietly, "it is." The truck pulled away. Peter and Helen stood on the sidewalk, their plan in ruins. I locked the shop door and turned to Mark. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "we offer him a way out, or we take him to court." My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. "What's our next move?" I asked. Mark's voice was steady. "We offer him a clean break, or we bury him." The hearing was scheduled for a grey Tuesday morning in late October. I woke at dawn, dressed in the navy suit I'd worn to Dr. Hartwell's memorial service, and pinned her silver brooch to my lapel, a small sparrow in flight. Mark met me on the courthouse steps at 8:30 a.m. He carried 2 briefcases and wore the calm expression of someone who'd prepared for every possible outcome. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Terrified," I admitted, "but ready." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." He handed me a folder. "Everything we need is in here. The recordings, the forged documents, the lease violations, the loan fraud. Peter's attorney will try to paint you as confused and vulnerable. Don't let them rattle you. Just tell the truth." We walked through security and made our way to courtroom 6B. The hallway was empty, except for a few lawyers conferring in hushed tones. Then I saw them, Peter and Helen, standing near the water fountain with a man in an expensive suit who could only be their attorney. Peter's eyes met mine, and for a moment, something flickered across his face. Regret? Fear? I couldn't tell. Helen looked away immediately, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. Their attorney, a tall man with silver hair and a practiced smile, approached us. "Mark Thornton," he said, extending his hand. Richard Voss. I represent Mr. Castellano. Mark shook his hand briefly. Richard. I'd like to propose a settlement before we go in, Voss said smoothly. My client is willing to drop the guardianship petition if Ms. Grace agrees to sell the bookstore property at fair market value. Clean break. No hard feelings. Your client has no standing to demand anything, Mark replied. He's facing lease termination, loan fraud charges, and a criminal investigation for forging medical documents. If anyone should be proposing settlements, it's him. Voss's smile tightened. Let's not be dramatic. This is a family matter that got out of hand. Surely we can resolve it without dragging everyone through court. We'll see what the judge thinks, Mark said, and walked past him. We entered the courtroom. It was smaller than I'd imagined. Wood-panelled walls, fluorescent lighting, rows of benches that smelled faintly of lemon polish. The judge's bench sat elevated at the front, flanked by the state seal and an American flag. Mark and I took our seats at the respondents' table. Peter, Helen, and Voss sat across the aisle at the petitioners' table. The air between us felt charged, heavy with everything unsaid. At exactly 9 a.m., the bailiff stood. All rise. The Honourable Judge Isabella Ramos presiding. The side door opened, and Judge Ramos entered. She was a woman in her early 50s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, sharp eyes, and the commanding presence of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms. She wore her black robe with quiet authority. She settled into her chair, opened the case file, and began reading. The courtroom was silent, except for the hum of the ventilation system. Then she looked up. Her eyes swept the room, moving from Voss to Peter to Helen, and finally landing on me. She froze. The file slipped slightly in her hands. Her lips parted, and for just a moment, the composed judge disappeared, replaced by someone who'd just seen a ghost. It's her, she whispered, barely audible. The entire courtroom went still. Voss glanced at Peter with confusion. The clerk stopped typing. Even the bailiff shifted nervously. Judge Ramos blinked, composed herself, and cleared her throat. My apologies. Please be seated. We sat. My heart hammered in my chest. She looked down at the file again, then back at me. Before we proceed, I need to address a potential conflict of interest. Her voice was steady now, professional. Ms. Grace, have we met before? I met her eyes. Not formally, Your Honour, but I believe we've crossed paths. Understanding flickered across her face. She nodded slowly. I see. She turned to the attorneys. 15 years ago, I prosecuted a case involving Apex Development Corporation. The case was built largely on evidence provided by an anonymous source known only as Marrow Sparrow. That source was never identified publicly, but I have reason to believe Ms. Grace may have been involved in that matter. Voss stood immediately. Your Honour? If there's a prior relationship— There is no relationship, Mr. Voss, Judge Ramos interrupted. I never knew the source's identity. However, out of an abundance of caution, I'm offering both parties the opportunity to request a different judge. Mark stood. The respondent has no objection to Your Honour presiding. Voss hesitated, clearly calculating. If he objected, it would delay the hearing, but it would also signal weakness. The petitioner has no objection, he said finally. Very well. Judge Ramos opened the file. This is a petition for emergency guardianship filed by Peter Castellano against Grace Castellano, alleging cognitive decline and inability to manage her affairs. Mr. Voss, present your case. Voss stood and launched into his argument. He painted a picture of a confused elderly woman, isolated and vulnerable, making poor decisions. He referenced the fabricated doctor's letter, the alleged fall, the supposed financial mismanagement. My client is acting out of love and concern, Voss concluded. He simply wants to ensure his aunt receives the care she needs. Judge Ramos listened without expression. Mr. Thornton, your response? Mark stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Your Honor, this is not a case about an elderly woman needing help. This is a case about financial exploitation, elder abuse, and fraud. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. The medical letter submitted by the petitioner is a forgery. Dr. Raymond Chen does not exist. The Riverside Cognitive Center is not a medical facility. The petitioner fabricated evidence to support a fraudulent guardianship claim. Voss shot to his feet. Your Honor, that's a serious accusation. It's a documented fact, Mark interrupted. He handed copies to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. The State Medical Board has confirmed there is no licensed physician by that name. We have recordings of the petitioner threatening Ms. Grace, demanding she sign over her property, and admitting he filed guardianship papers as leverage. Judge Ramos studied the documents, her expression darkening. Furthermore, Mark continued, the petitioner took out a fraudulent loan using Ms. Grace's property as collateral, property he does not own. He is currently facing lease termination from the Marrow Street Community Land Trust, which Ms. Grace chairs, for harassment and fraudulent claims against a trust landlord. Peter's face had gone pale. Helen was staring at the table, her hands clenched. Your Honor, Mark said, his voice cutting through the silence, this petition should be dismissed immediately, and the petitioner should be referred for criminal investigation. Judge Ramos set the documents down. Mr. Voss, do you have a response? Voss stood slowly. He looked at Peter, then at the documents, then back at the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to request a recess to confer with my client. Denied? Judge Ramos's voice was ice. You brought this petition. You presented fabricated evidence. You will answer for it now. Voss opened his mouth, then closed it. He had nothing. Judge Ramos turned to Peter. Mr. Castellano, stand up. Peter stood, his legs visibly shaking. Did you forge a medical letter to support this guardianship petition? Peter's attorney whispered something, but Peter ignored him. I was trying to help. Answer the question. Yes or no? Yes, Peter whispered. Did you threaten your aunt to coerce her into signing over her property? I didn't threaten. Mr. Thornton has recordings. Would you like me to play them? Peter's shoulders sagged. Yes. Judge Ramos's expression was carved from stone. This petition is dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Castellano, you are hereby ordered to cease all contact with Ms. Grace. Any violation will result in immediate arrest for harassment. She turned to the clerk. I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. Bailiff, please ensure Mr. Castellano provides his contact information before leaving. She looked at me, and for just a moment, her expression softened. Ms. Grace, I apologize that you were subjected to this. You have the court's full support in pursuing any further legal remedies. Thank you, Your Honor, I said quietly. Judge Ramos stood. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Peter sank into his chair, his head in his hands. Helen was crying silently. Voss was already packing his briefcase, his face tight with anger. Mark leaned over and squeezed my shoulder. It's over, Grace. But as we walked out of the courtroom, I saw Peter watching me. His eyes were hollow, defeated. And despite everything, a small part of me, the part that had raised him, loved him, believed in him, felt the weight of his fall. Outside, the October air was crisp and clean. Mark walked me to my car. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now the DA investigates. Peter will likely face charges. Helen might cooperate in exchange for immunity. And you," he said, smiling, "get to go home." I looked back at the courthouse, its grey stone facade imposing against the autumn sky. "She remembered," I said softly. "Judge Ramos. She remembered Marrow Sparrow." "Some debts," Mark said, "are never forgotten." I drove back to Marrow Street, parked in front of the bookstore, and sat for a moment in the quiet. The spider plant was still in the window. The chalkboard still read, "Bring back your voice." I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The shop smelled like old books and coffee. Sunlight streamed through the windows. I was home. 3 months later, winter settled over Marrow Street like a quiet blessing. Snow dusted the sidewalks, and the bookstore windows glowed warm against the December cold. I hung evergreen garlands above the shelves and placed a small tree in the cafe corner, decorated with paper ornaments made by the neighborhood children. The shop had never felt more alive. Mrs. Amber stopped by every Tuesday with soup. The literacy program I'd paused during the legal battle was running again, now with 6 volunteers and 12 students. The community garden across the street had been winterized, ready for spring planting. And the Marrow Street Trust, no longer a secret I carried alone, had become a beacon for other neighborhoods fighting displacement. Mark visited on a cold Thursday afternoon, stamping snow from his boots as he entered. "I have news," he said, settling into his usual chair at the cafe table. I poured him coffee. "Good news or complicated news?" "Both." He pulled out a folder. Peter accepted a plea deal. He pled guilty to elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. He'll serve 18 months, followed by probation and mandatory restitution. I sat down slowly, the weight of it settling over me. And Helen? She cooperated fully, testified against Apex Ventures Group and Senior Placement Solutions. In exchange, she received immunity. She's left the state, moved back to her family in Oregon. I nodded, feeling the complicated tangle of relief and sadness. Peter had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences. But he was still my nephew, still the boy I'd once helped with homework and taken to the library on Saturday mornings. "There's more," Mark continued. The DA's investigation uncovered 12 other cases, elderly victims targeted by the same network. Your case broke it open, Grace. You didn't just save yourself. You saved others. Tears pricked my eyes. Dr. Hartwell would have been proud. "She knew," Mark said gently. "She always knew you'd be ready when the time came." He handed me another document. "The Trust Board met last week. We voted unanimously to establish the Dr. Rosalind Hartwell Fellowship, a fund to provide legal assistance to seniors facing exploitation. We'd like you to chair it." I looked at the document, at Dr. Hartwell's name, printed in elegant script, and felt her presence like a hand on my shoulder. "I'd be honored," I said. That evening, after Mark left, I climbed the stairs to my apartment and opened the desk drawer where I kept Dr. Hartwell's letters. There was one envelope left, the last one, marked, "After the wolves are gone." I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, then you've won. The wolves came, and you stood your ground. I knew you would. You've spent your life in service. As a nurse, a neighbor, a guardian. You've given everything to others, often at the cost of your own comfort and recognition. But true power, Grace, has never been about recognition. It's been about protection. about standing between the vulnerable and those who would exploit them. You are the embodiment of what I hoped this trust would become. Not an institution, but a living commitment to community, to dignity, to home. The work isn't finished. It never is. There will always be wolves. But now you know you're not alone. You have allies, resources, and a legacy that will outlive us both. I have one final request. Teach someone else. Find the next guardian. Pass on what you've learned. The trust will only survive if it lives in the hearts of those who understand its mission. You were my choice, Grace, and you've proven me right in every way. Go forward with courage, live fully, and know that you've made a difference that will echo for generations. With all my love and gratitude, Roslyn. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the drawer. Then I walked to the window and looked out over Marrow Street. The streetlights cast golden pools on the snow. Across the street, lights glowed in the residential lofts, including Unit 4B, now home to a young family with 2 children. The community garden lay peaceful under its blanket of white. And below, my bookstore stood solid and welcoming, its windows bright with life. I thought about Dr. Hartwell's final request. Teach someone else. Find the next guardian. And I realized I already had. The next morning, I called Mrs. Amber. "Grace, is everything all right?" she asked, concern immediate in her voice. "Everything's fine," I assured her. "I was wondering if you'd like to come by the shop this afternoon. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." She arrived at 2 o'clock, carrying a tin of cookies and wearing her usual expression of warm curiosity. We settled at the cafe table with tea. "Mrs. Amber," I began, "how long have we known each other?" 15 years, give or take," she said, "since you opened the shop. And in all that time, you've been one of the most observant, caring people on this street. You notice when someone's struggling. You show up with soup. You ask the right questions." She smiled. "That's just being a good neighbor." "It's more than that," I said. "It's guardianship, and I'd like to teach you about a different kind of guardianship, the kind Dr. Hartwell taught me." I pulled out the trust binder and opened it to the first page. "This is the Marrow Street Community Land Trust," I said, "and I'd like you to join the board." Mrs. Amber's eyes widened as I explained the properties, the mission, the protection we provided. I told her about Dr. Hartwell's vision, about the battle with Peter, about the fellowship we were establishing. "You want me to help run this?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "I want you to help protect it," I said. "And eventually, when I'm gone, I want you to lead it." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the binder. Then she looked up, and her eyes were bright with purpose. "I'd be honored," she said. We spent the afternoon going through the documents, discussing the properties, talking about the families we served. Mrs. Amber asked sharp questions, took careful notes, and understood immediately what Dr. Hartwell had built. As the winter sun began to set, casting long shadows through the shop, she closed the binder and looked at me. "Grace, why me?" "Because you see people," I said simply. "You see their dignity, their struggles, their worth. That's what a guardian does. That's what this trust needs." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for being trustworthy." That night, I sat in my apartment with a cup of tea, watching the snow fall softly over Marrow Street. The spider plant sat on the windowsill, its leaves reaching toward the light. Dr. Hartwell's photograph smiled from the desk. I thought about the journey, from the terrifying moment when Peter first demanded I sign away my home, to the courtroom where Judge Ramos recognized me, to this quiet evening where the future felt secure. I had been tested. I had been afraid. But I had not been broken. The bookstore would continue. The trust would grow. The mission would endure. And somewhere, I hoped, Dr. Hartwell was smiling. I picked up my journal and wrote, December 15th. Today I passed the torch. Not because I'm leaving, but because legacy isn't about holding on. It's about letting go at the right time, in the right way, to the right person. The wolves came. We stood our ground. And now we're teaching others to do the same. Dr. Hartwell once told me that real power protects. It doesn't parade. I understand now. Power isn't about control or recognition. It's about service. It's about standing between the vulnerable and those who would harm them. It's about building something that outlasts you. I am Grace. I am a bookstore owner, a former nurse, a neighbor, a guardian. And I am not alone. I closed the journal and looked out at the street below, my street, my community, my home. The snow continued to fall, soft and steady, covering everything in quiet peace. And in the morning, I would wake at 5:30, brew coffee, water the spider plant, and unlock the door, because the work continues, the mission endures, and the legacy lives on. 5 years later, the Marrow Street Community Land Trust had expanded to protect 23 properties across 3 neighborhoods. The Dr. Rosalind Hartwell Fellowship had provided legal assistance to over 60 seniors facing exploitation, and Mrs. Amber had become the Trust's vice chair, training 2 new board members in the art of quiet guardianship. Grace still opened the bookstore every morning at 5:30. The spider plant, now nearly 20 years old, had produced dozens of offspring that lived in homes throughout the neighborhood. And on the wall behind the register, in a simple frame, hung a small embroidered sparrow, a gift from Judge Isabella Ramos, with a note that read, "Some debts are never forgotten. Some heroes never seek recognition. Thank you for both." Grace smiled every time she saw it, because she knew the truth. She wasn't a hero. She was simply a guardian, and that was enough.